This podcast is part of the Big Heads Media Podcast Network. Go to bigheadsmedia.com for more great podcasts.
We actually have the live guest that I have been dangling at you for an hour, dear listeners. He is on the phone, calling all the way from Florida, USA. Mike Whelan, you out there? Can you hear me?
Good morning, Tucker, and good morning to Los Angeles. Yes, I'm sitting here at, it's now 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm in my Snuggie. I may not leave my bathrobe all day long, so happy 4th to everybody.
Happy 4th, brother. I'm happy that you're calling in. Can you hear me nice, or am I okay?
Man, I hear you beautifully. You know, as long as it's not one of these, I got to get up at 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm okay, and I'm functioning good by 9:30, 10 o'clock.
Beautiful.
So we're okay.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, Mike, I've been telling them all before you called in who you are and what you're all about. But why don't you just go ahead and spare me the butchering and just give your credentials here. Run them down for us before we get going. Mike Whelan, Michael J. Whelan, Michael J. Fox Whelan, take us back to the future. Who are you, man?
Well, I spent about 30 years in the television business. I had a wonderful run at HBO Sports in New York, where I worked on the incredible World Championship Boxing Series inside the NFL at the time with Len Dawson, Nick Bonacani, and Chris Collinsworth. Wimbledon tennis, which we did all the matches going into the finals, which NBC would take over. And we were really known for our documentary producing. And one of the great things about HBO back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s is, you know, we ran without commercials. So we were able to produce shows and documentaries so much more like mini movies because we didn't have the interruption break. And then in 1994, I got the opportunity to come down with a blank canvas and create the Golf Channel, which I stayed until about the year 2000 and have left. And now I'm doing different and better things.
I hear that. So we're going to definitely delve into the Golf Channel, but I know you and I have been talking quite a bit because, first of all, we met through the internet, and you found me initially because you listened to me on a podcast for my golf website, FromTheBackTees.com, where I write for, and you'd heard me purporting some things that weren't very accurate about a piece I was about to write that turned into my 7,000-word piece, Breaking Bad with Peter Kessler, a man that you not only know well, but pretty much gave his break in the television broadcasting business. And you were a big contributor for that and helped me out with that. But let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing here, because I'm writing a new profile with you, kind of a memoir profile about your life called I Built a Masterpiece and Then I Fell Apart, the Michael J. Whelan story. So, Mike, let's get in the time machine like we're going to and give them just a little teaser. We don't have to go into all the gory details here, but a little teaser of what's to come in I Built a Masterpiece and Then I Fell Apart. Let's tell them a little bit about your history here. So let's go back to the past again, even further back. Who are you, man? Where'd you come from? How did you grow up? How did you get into producing these legendary moments? Give us a little bit about your childhood. Give us a little bit about where you came from and who you are.
I always grew up in the sports environment. My father was heavily involved in the professional sports world. He was the athletic trainer back in the 60s for the Pittsburgh Pirates, specifically in 1960 when the Pirates beat the New York Yankees with the first ever walk-off home run. My dad was a tremendous raconteur and storyteller in character back in the Pittsburgh days, where I kind of grew up a little bit before I moved back to California. I was the bat boy back in 1960 when Mazeroski rounded third base after defeating the heavily favored New York Yankees. My parents divorced when I was about 8 or 9 years old, and we moved back to California, where I grew up with my grandparents and my mother. My father went from the Pittsburgh Pirates to the New York Knicks basketball team, where he became a well-known physician for the New York Knicks. They called him Big Time Danny Whelan, and he was known primarily for being Red Holtzman, the trainer's right-hand guy. My dad was known for giving Will Frazier the name Clyde, Bill Bradley, Dollar Bill, and was just really heavily into sports. So I've always been around professional athletes, the sports world. I love the environment, but never connected it with television by any means. I went to St. Mary's College on a baseball scholarship, and then eventually went out to New York to think I was going to medical school. And about 2 or 3 weeks before I was going to begin school, I happened to have a date. And my date at the time was an actress for a soap opera called All My Children at the time. And we went to a party, and at the party followed a production of one of the shows. And I got a chance to sit in the control room, see how it's done, and I was mesmerized by how similar television is to sports, the teamwork, the pressure, the thrill of success. And it was something that just fascinated me. And happenstance that the post party that evening, I happened to be introduced to the president of CBS, who took a liking to me and said, "Hey, if you don't want to become a doctor, why don't you come and work for me?" And about 2 weeks later, I sent a letter to NYU, said I wouldn't be starting medical school, and got a job as a production assistant for CBS. Didn't last there very long, and ended up doing a 14-day stint at HBO, which turned into 14 years.
So what I think is so ironic, I'm going to fill in the pieces for you here, was that your father, who had been this raconteur, as you say, and had been this sports icon in his own right, was not thrilled with you going into sports entertainment as a career. That's correct?
Well, my father and I had been estranged for many, many years. As I said, when my parents divorced when I was 8 years old, we moved back to the West Coast, where my mother and father were originally from, and I grew up really kind of poor. I grew up in a 300-square-foot home. My mother and my sister slept in one room, and my brother and I shared a pull-out sofa until I was 18 years old. The dichotomy of that is, on the other hand, my father was a celebrity in the sports world. He was very, very famous, and he lived a completely different life. So for many years, because of the 3,000-mile difference, my father and I had no relationship, except when the Knicks would come to the Bay Area and play the Warriors, I was the ball boy. Or when they would go down and play the Lakers, I was the ball boy. But my dad and I didn't really have a real close relationship. So when I had the opportunity to future my education and look at physical therapy, orthopedic surgery, and go to New York, my father was happy that not only was I doing something wonderful with my career, but also that he and I were sort of rekindling our relationship again, until the day when I came home and said, "Hey, I've got this wonderful idea. I'm giving up everything that I've worked so hard to do to go into television," which I knew nothing about. My dad threw me out of the house at the time and said, "You're never going to become anything." And so I spent weeks living in a YMCA in Midtown Manhattan, not knowing anybody and wondering if I had made a decision, having taken a job that paid me at the time $12,000 a year. Fast forward years later, as I became more successful, became an Emmy Award-winning producer, my dad put his arm around me and said, "Son, I knew it all the time." And up until his death, we had a great relationship up until the end.
Well, that's interesting, and I definitely think that many of our listeners and many of the people that would be interested in this story are dreamers, and you obviously had a dream long before you became a big success at all of it. Did you know all along that your goal was to be the kind of architect, the kind of masterpiece painter that you became as a producer, or was it just to break into TV in general?
I think my creativity evolved from a very dysfunctional childhood experience of divorce. And, once again, back in the 50s and 60s, my father was one of the biggest things in the professional sports Pittsburgh area. and people looked up to my father as being part of the Pittsburgh Pirates. And part of my identity as a very, very young boy was who my dad was. And when my dad and my mother divorced at a very young age, and my dad suddenly disappeared in the middle of the night, it left a lot of questions to the people on the neighborhood, and mostly my childhood friends, of where in the hell is your dad? We haven't seen him for ages. So in order to protect myself emotionally, I had to create stories of where my father was and why he wasn't around. And I learned to be a fabulous storyteller to protect my sanity at a very, very young age. And I think that's where my storytelling actually evolved from. And I just became really good at being able to see scenes and see people's lives and emotionally be able to talk about them or write about them at a depth that most people could not. So as bad as it was when I was a young lad, it really helped create the creative person that I finally became.
That's interesting, and I think a lot of people would think that a tough childhood like that might lead someone to no success at all, but in essence, it kind of drove you to be the storyteller that you became. All right, now let's flash forward. You're at HBO, you've been there a while, you're starting to get successful. You were involved with helping produce some very iconic events in sports history, and obviously anybody that knows HBO is known for incredible sports programming. I'd say HBO Sports is some of the finest that there is in the entertainment industry. And okay, let's go to your first kind of big breaks there. You said it was boxing. Was it Sugar Ray Leonard? Where'd you get your break?
HBO back in the early '80s was known for its incredible boxing world championship events, and that's where I was brought in, and there was kind of three amigos who were in charge of all of the boxing, and that was my two mentors, Ross Greenberg and Rick Bernstein, and then there was myself, and the three of us, for the most part, shared the duties of producing the boxing events. But back in those days is when boxing was king. Back in those days, you had Larry Holmes, and you had Sugar Ray Leonard, and you had the Roberto Durans, and you had the Tommy Hearns, and you had an up-and-coming guy by the name of Mike Tyson, and you had Julio Cesar Chavez, and you had Meldrick Taylor. Everything that HBO did was must-see TV for the boxing fans, and I happened to be a part of all of that for well over a decade. Obviously, probably the most known fight was the one that we did out of Tokyo, and that was the night that Buster Douglas, a 40-1 underdog, knocked out Iron Mike Tyson, and both lives changed forever, including HBO Sports really went to a level that was unseen in the sports broadcasting arena.
You know, I was just watching the documentary that ESPN did on their 30 for 30 about Buster Douglas and that humongous upset, and they were saying odds-wise it's got to be one of the biggest upsets in any sport in history. But you were telling me a little bit about that night and being there helping produce it, and a little bit about how euphoric it got even for you guys. Give us a little bit of that. What was it like for you guys in the truck and producing it when that humongous, unprecedented, unbelievable upset happened?
Well, the amount of people that go on to put on a live television sports production would be shocking to most people. It takes well over 100 people, men and women, in front of the camera and behind the camera to actually produce a live event. And for the most part, the people who do these jobs are the most utmost professional, focused, skilled individuals that exist on planet Earth. I mean, I really related to, looking at some of these surgical documentaries they do where the orthopedic goes in and they replace hearts and knees. For many people it's gory and it's hard to believe it can be done, but those who have the experience, it's just what they do. But the Mike Tyson-Buster Douglas fight was a little bit different. nobody ever anticipated that Buster Douglas had a shot. Now, I will say that I didn't think Mike Tyson was on his best that particular night, because my room at the Otani Hotel was a floor above Mike's, and every now and then, being a good friend of Mike Tyson, I would pop in only to see that Mike had a lot of visitors coming in and out of that room that I felt could possibly distract him. So I don't think Mike Tyson's game was as focused as it should have been, and I didn't think Mike was taking Buster seriously. But to fast forward that evening of that fight, nobody had ever seen Mike Tyson in trouble, let alone being knocked down. And there are some beautiful scenes within that fight where when Buster Douglas knocks Mike Tyson down and the handheld camera goes right into Mike Tyson's face, and all you see is a lost, confused individual trying to find his mouthpiece to put it back in. And it was the first time ever in live sports production, I think, where the actual crew became fans of the event. The production trucks were actually shaking with people screaming with excitement, to the point where we lost our focus for a couple of seconds before our executive producer at the time, Ross Greenberg, had to reel everybody back in. But it was probably the only time in my career where I went from being a surgical producer to a huge fan of the event, witnessing something that I knew would be talked about for decades to come.
Yeah, no kidding. And this wasn't too long before you finally got your biggest break, which was when Golf Channel's original founder, Joseph Gibbs, and the other investors, including the immortal Arnold Palmer, got in touch with you about coming in and being the executive producer and essentially the architect, the Leonardo da Vinci, as we keep saying, of the Golf Channel. So let's flash forward from Mike Whelan, the successful HBO boxing producer, to Mike Whelan getting called by Joseph Gibbs and Company and being offered this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to come in at the genesis of the Golf Channel's existence and create it all.
It was kind of written like a script. You got to remember, I'm a California boy, Northern California, up in the Marin County area. Spent a few years living on Maui, so I love the warm weather. I love doing things outside, but my job took me to New York City, where I lived in Hoboken, New Jersey, took the train in every single day, and worked Midtown Manhattan. And it happened to be a January, February, very cold blizzard in 1994. And I just remember staring out almost hypnotically outside of my window, saying to myself, God, I'm so sick of this weather. I wish that, I could move back home to California and do the same thing I'm doing now. Strangely, the next day, I was approached by a good friend of mine who was the senior vice president of programming. This gentleman didn't actually even work in the production department, but he and I were good friends, and that's Robert Greenway, who had, unbeknownst to me, taken the job as the senior vice president of production and programming to the Golf Channel, and offered me the position to go to the Golf Channel and become the vice president and executive producer of production.
And you said he offered you this in the bathroom? You said this was in the bathroom, right? You got the pitch in the bathroom.
The way it happened was kind of strange, and it was very, very close to a gas station-like environment. I happened to one day be going to, I was peeing in the men's room, and Bob kind of nuzzled up alongside of me and whispered in my ear, young man, I might have something for you. Now, in many cases, Mike might take that as an indication of something
toe tapping going on there, dude.
Maybe a little shocking and X-rated, but I laughed it off, and I asked him what it was, and he said at the time, I can't tell you exactly, but something's going to be happening to me, and I'll let you know then. Now, at the time, I thought Bob was just going to be promoted maybe to president of HBO or something like that. Never my wildest dreams that I think that he would be packing up his bags and leaving a tremendously good, high-paying job at HBO, where it was a safe working environment. We were a family, and really take the chance of doing something different. And a week or two later, when Bob's job got finalized by Joe Gibbs, IMG, and Arnold Palmer, is when Bob offered me the job.
So explain exactly what they were wanting you to do. I mean, I've said executive producer, but people hear that and they don't know what that means.
Well, I got hired to be the vice president and executive producer of production. What I do is I create television shows from scratch. And I do them very, very well, and I was very successful at HBO. And I think that my creativity and design and working with others stood out, obviously, to Bob Greenway. And what he wanted me to do was to get to Orlando as fast as I possibly could and create a 24-hour, 365-day, 7-day-a-week television network, of which at the time I was offered the job, not one person had been hired. So I ended up going to Orlando, Florida. In 2 weeks from today will be my 25th anniversary of moving to Orlando, Florida. That particular summer, I produced Wimbledon tennis for HBO. I jumped on a plane from London and flew to Las Vegas, where I produced a fight for HBO, and then took a red eye, packed up my home, and then moved to Orlando, Florida. But when I was offered the job on that plane flight from New York to London is when I started to, on a cocktail napkin, start to sketch frantically what the hell a 24-hour golf channel was going to be, because at the time I had no idea what I was going to do. But I did know that I needed to reach a niche audience. I did know that the people who watch and play sport are really, really interesting men and women. They love to learn. They love to get better. They love their history. And I wanted the Golf Channel to be, and the words that always came to my mind were intimate, intimate, intimate. I wanted people who would watch this network to feel like they knew Arnold Palmer, or they knew Annika Sorenstam, or they knew Pete Dye, or they knew some of the greatest instructors in the world. So one of the things that I wanted to do that really hadn't been done in sports television is I wanted to interject the call-in opportunity where the viewer could participate. And that's when I came up with the idea of the shows Golf Talk Live, where a host would interview once or twice a week the greatest characters of the game. I created a live Academy show where the greatest instructors in the world would give you and I, the 14, 20, 30 handicap, the ability to improve on his and her game. And not only that, you could call in and talk to the Jim McClains, the Jim Flicks, the Dean Reinmuths, the Dave Pells. You could, we'd also have a live show at the end of the Sunday tournament where we would recap what just took place on Sunday, very similar to what the networks were doing with their NFL coverage. And then, of course, I wanted a weekly news show where we would cover exactly like SportsCenter would do on ESPN, what was going on in the world of sports. So in the 8-hour flight from New York to London, and from London to Las Vegas, and Las Vegas to New Jersey, I had really on a scratch paper, which I had sent to you, pretty much laid out the concept of the shows. I laid out how many people it was going to take to do it. I started to create the music that I was going to use, the design for the sets, pretty much everything that when I got to Orlando, at least I would be somewhat prepared to start the venture of bringing these people in and getting this work done to get the network on the air. Now, the interesting thing about it is, you don't put together a network in 4.5 months like I was asked to do. I'm watching a documentary right now, a miniseries about the creation of Fox News, and Roger Ailes had 19 and a half months to put on Fox News with $1 billion budget from Rupert Murdoch. I had 4 months with chewing gum and spit to put together the Golf Channel. But in my mind, I knew exactly what every show was going to look like, what every show was going to sound like, what every show was going to feel like. And my job was just finding the right men and women who could fulfill my dreams and my vision. And I was very, very blessed to be able to pillage every available producer, director, support staff person on planet Earth and get them convinced that this dream that Joe and Arnold and Bob and I had was going to be something that they wanted to be a part of. So brought them down to the wild, wild west of Orlando, Florida, and there it began.
So most people, when they think about golf, and especially Golf Channel, think about wealth, ostentatious kind of wealth. Yet you and I have both talked. I've talked with many people that were involved with the creation of Golf Channel. Everybody says this felt like a humongous dice roll, Mike. It felt like this huge gamble, and there wasn't a ton of budget up front. The Joseph Gibbs and the investors were bleeding money just to keep it going for a while. There weren't that many viewers early on. No one was sure that this was going to become successful, and it was only after a while that you guys started to see it really take off and start heading towards the $1 billion entertainment industry it is now. Kind of take me through, how did it find its legs and go from just being a dream that this Alabama businessman dreamt up with Arnold Palmer and friends to being something that is as ubiquitous as any channel on your cable package now that you get?
Well, the relieving part about this whole journey was that it wasn't my job to get distribution and the financing for this particular network. Joe and Arnold and all of those that did a fabulous job of procuring about 50 or 60 or 70 million dollars to get this thing up and running. As far as the viewership was going at the very beginning, Joe believed that it could be a pay channel that you would pay $2.99 or $3.99 or $4.99 and you could get the Golf Channel, and that he was banking on the millions of people who are already part of the golf base to pony up this type of money and to be successful out of the chute. Well, that didn't quite work. I'm not sure if the night that we went on live in January, if more people follow Peter Kessler, as Keith Herson once told me, if Peter has a bigger audience today on Twitter, or there was more people watching him that night that we went on the air. But I have no idea if there was one person or 9,000 people that night. But to Joe's credit and to the financial, to Jim Lowry, who was our CFO, and to those that knew a lot more about distribution than I did, they quickly changed the business model and said, you know what, they pretty much call it the heroin syndrome. We're going to give away our product for almost free. In fact, we'll pay you, and then at some point you're going to fall in love with it so much that we'll be in a position then to call our shot and to get which money we needed to air the broadcast. But in the very beginning, it was tough. And the hard part about it is that I had hired close to 100 people who bought into my dream. And many of these people, hey, they sold everything back home. We have people from Vancouver to the East Coast, from Alaska to Europe, who came to Orlando, Florida, and spent every penny they possibly had to create this new life and new career in Orlando. And every single day, I wasn't sure if Joe was going to be able to make payroll. So not only did I have the pressure of creating this network that had to blow the advertisers and the distributors out of the water with beautiful production skills so they would buy into it, but I also feared and wondered and had this concern every single day about all of these people that I brought in, and was my vision a true reality for all these people, or was this thing going to fall and implode, and everybody would lose everything that they came down here to do? So it was very, very difficult for a lot of the senior officers in the very beginning to make sure that this thing worked. I don't think all the employees knew how close we were to not making payroll every Friday. I don't know if they knew the financial ramifications. They had no reason to. They were so engrossed in doing their own shows that was my job, and that was Bob's job, and that was Joe Gibbs' job, and that was other senior executive jobs in the financing world to make sure that we kept this thing afloat.
So what was the big turning point? I mean, I know I was going to ask you about Peter Kessler, but it seemed like Peter early on became the face and the personality of the network. Was it his popularity? Did it have to do with the content of the shows? Did people finally realize that they actually wanted a 24-hour a day, 7-day a week golf channel? I mean, what was it that really put you guys over the top?
I think there was no doubt that when I hired Peter Kessler and Peter's persona radiated on the 3 shows that I put him on, that those that were watching the show knew that what they were witnessing was a special television network that had not only creativity and a good vision to look at, but it also had the authority of knowing the sport real well. Peter was no doubt about it. He was the most visible only because I put him on 3 of our top shows right out of the gates. So it was kind of hard not to turn on the Golf Channel and not see Peter Kessler in some form. But Peter is a golf savant. There is no doubt about that. I've been in the industry for 30 years. I've worked with the greatest, from Bob Costas to Al Michaels to John Madden to Jim Lampley to Chris Berman to Jim Nance. I know them all, and I will say this, that nobody knows a sport as well as Peter Kessler knew golf. And once we could get him comfortable, camera ready, I think it gave credibility to the network, and golf magazines, publications, the advertising community paid attention. Now, Peter was fabulous, don't get me wrong, but we also had Golf Central. We also had some old classic shows that had been hidden for years that had cobwebs, the old Shell's Wonderful World of Golf that we repackaged. I had brilliant people like Keith Hirschland, who, took live tournament coverage and had free range to move it into the 20th century. And I had other great producers. I had Jeff Himes, who did a fabulous job at our new shows, and Jay Kossoff, who was a brilliant documentarian, and I had a Paul Farnsworth. I had, Jennifer Mills and Tommy Macro. I mean, I can go through names of people that were so impassioned about what they did that it was hard not to see the end result when you turned on the golf. It was done well. It was done beautifully. It felt like an HBO production. We covered the sport as well as we could with the budget that we had. And I think that it was hard not to buy into the future of this network once you turned into it.
Well, and I've spoken to many of these people who you just named, and every one of them says that you were working like a dog, Mike. You worked 18-hour days. You barely ever slept. You were there doing everything.
That's true. I mean, imagine that if tomorrow you bought an acre of land and you were going to design your home, but you only had 45 days to design, to get the contractors and to build the home, or it all went away. Imagine what that would be like for you, your wife, those around you, the contractors. It would be mayhem. And as I said, I just gave you the side-by-side analogy of in the 90s, there were 2 niche programs being developed. The Golf Channel, Fox News, at the same exact time. Fox News had a year and a half with $1 billion budget, and had the pockets of Rupert Murdoch. Golf Channel, we had a fraction of that. And Joe Gibbs brought me in towards the end of July of 94. And within 5.5 months, we were going to pull the switch and go on the air live. So yes, I had 100 people to hire. I had shows I needed to create. I designed all the sets. I composed all of the music. I created all of the graphics. I mean, I was really a hands-on person because I knew exactly what this network needed to look like. A lot of the people that I brought in hadn't done HBO-type quality shows. They were more run and gun and get the show on the air, and I knew that we were going to have one chance to impress everybody who watched it. So I had very high expectations of what I wanted, the people that I wanted. And yes, I would show up at the office at 5:30, 6 o'clock. The only person who was there was the janitor. And I would often leave at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. And that was my day. And, this show had to get on the air. And, while I had many times where in my honesty of inside my heart, I didn't think I was going to pull this off. I just knew that what I had to do was going to be putting the pedal to the floor and do whatever I needed to do not to let down all of the people who I had promised this great network to. And yes, it was overwhelming. It was fearful. My body took a toll. My mind took a toll. But I had to keep that all inside of my little 12-inch cranium because I had a job to do. I was a great general, and we got it done.
So did you ever think the Golf Channel wasn't going to make it? I mean, were there those moments where you really doubted it?
Every now and then, in budget meetings, every now and then when the rehearsals wouldn't go as well, every now and then when I didn't have the money that I needed to build the set. I tell the one story that the only time that I got hired from July of 94 till we went on the air in January of 95, that my heart sunk was one evening, and I remember this, we were in a senior executive meeting, and Joe Gibbs shared with us that in a week or so that Arnold Palmer would be going on with Jay Leno, and maybe I heard him wrong, but what I heard was he's going on Jay Leno to talk about the Golf Channel. And I said, my gosh, you couldn't get a better audience, you couldn't get better PR than what this was going to be like. And I remember that particular evening inviting maybe 2 or 3 dozen people over to my small apartment at the time. And at 11:30, we got ready to watch Arnold Palmer and Jay Leno talk about the Golf Channel. And Jay introduced Arnold. He set him up. He threw him a couple of softballs. And Arnold, for whatever reason, for his 12 minutes, going to millions of homes, forgot to mention one damn thing about the Golf Channel.
I mean, that must have been crushing, right?
You could have heard a pin drop in my apartment that night. And I thought that, oh my gosh, maybe Arnold doesn't believe in the Golf Channel as much as I thought he did. And so for about 2 or 3 days, there was just funeral march, with this soundtrack behind us of this sad Private Ryan destruction that people kind of walked around and felt. It quickly passed. And we got back on our jobs, and things were okay.
So let's go a little bit further now. You've been there a while. Things are up and running. They're successful, full speed ahead. But Mike Whelan wasn't necessarily going full speed ahead inside his own mind. And that's part of what this piece we're writing is about, is that you had struggled for years very privately with depression, bipolar depression, and other mental issues that nobody but you really knew about. You kept it very close to the vest. Obviously, it was a different time as far as mental health awareness goes. People were stigmatized if they said any of that out loud, and obviously you wouldn't have been put in the position you were put in with the power that you had at Golf Channel. So you're struggling with all of this internally, obviously trying to balance all this pressure that you've got coming from up top, trying to create all these things. You obviously got people within the company that are gunning for your job. They're always taking shots at the biggest guy in the room. There were some people trying to very, very directly to try and snipe you out and stab you in the back and the front and all over. And you're struggling with these mental issues. Kind of take us through a little bit of that. How did that kind of finally manifest into something that you needed to address?
Well, I think that all of us grow up with the emotional sins of our parents. They manifest themselves in a variety of ways. I had always, since I was 9 or 10 years old, knew that I didn't feel right. There was no label back in the 50s and 60s and 70s to what I was experiencing. Mental health back then was a taboo. You certainly didn't go to psychiatrists or psychologists, and you didn't talk about what was thought of as weaknesses in one's psyche. So, this severe bipolar depression that I had kind of just pressure cooked inside of my mind for decades. I got a lot of help when I was at HBO, and many of the people who I worked with at HBO were fully aware of these issues that I battled on a daily basis in silence. But I had a community of people that protected me and that I could talk to. And I think one of the greatest things about mental illness is having that support team of people that accept you the way you are and are willing to tolerate you for the way you are and understand you for the way you are. But when I came down to the Golf Channel, I had pretty much abandoned 100% of my support system. And that goes from drinking, and that goes from seeing the people that I needed to talk to. I came to the Golf Channel thinking that it was a new life and a new way of living. And in the very beginning, I was so busy, and I felt healthy, and I felt good. But, anybody who has any type of mental illness will attest to that sooner or later, the maladies start to creep back into one's life. And, the pressure of creating this 24-hour what would be $1 billion network, and everybody's life style and responsibilities on my shoulder. I couldn't walk down to Joe Gibbs' office and say to Joe, "Hey, Joe, I'm scared and I'm fearful and I don't know if I can do this. And I just want to let you know that the guy you hired to protect your $100 million investment has these issues." That wouldn't quite fly, nor would I ever contemplate that. But, that's one of the reasons that people who are creative, whether it be in the television, whether it be in the theater, whether it be whether it be a painter, whether it be a Wall Street person, when you have a mind that is an A-type, hyper-verbal, hyper-manic way of thinking, you need to be able to find a way to silence those voices. And for many of us, we don't. So what we do is, we find it in some dysfunctional way. At the end of the 18-hour days, you have to understand this, and this is very, very important, is that, 100 people came to Orlando, Florida, and knew nobody but the people they worked with all day long. We didn't have a community. We didn't know people on our blocks. We didn't have church groups, and we didn't have support systems. All we knew were the people that worked to your left and they worked to your right. And at the end of an 18-hour day, we worked so damn hard, we were under so much pressure that what most of us ended up doing was going to the local watering hole in Orlando, Florida, where we could decompress at the end of the day. And that's something that a lot of people who have severe mental illness feel a calm in doing, because the alcohol or the dysfunctional environment will silence the voices in their mind, and they'll feel okay for a while in effect they're pouring gasoline on their malady. So every single night at the end of the day, I forgot. I was an executive. I was the boss. But in my mind, in my experience, I was one of the gang. I was, at the end of the day, I wanted some camaraderie. I wanted people to talk to. I wanted a community. I wanted to be around people where I didn't feel fearful, where I didn't have these voices reminded me of my mental illness or my suicidal ideologies. So you drink. And you drink until the end of the night, and then you go home, and then you work the next day, and you repeat this pattern day after day after day after day after day. And unfortunately, in that type of an environment, in a niche creation that comes along once a lifetime, it led to a lot of problems with a lot of people.
And I know about Sam Snead's, right?
The problems weren't when people walked in the Golf Channel and left the Golf Channel. I mean, there was never any issues inside the walls of those offices. The problems came from outside. And, I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that when you create a television network, there's going to be some people, as you said, that are out to get you.
Well, and we were talking about Sam Snead's, Mike. Sam Snead's was the pub or the bar that everybody hung out at that worked at Golf Channel, and every single person I've interviewed has brought up Sam Snead's. So I know that was ground zero for kicking it.
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to. I mean, it was our Cheers bar. Everybody knew your name.
And Scott Van Pelt said he didn't want to give too much away, but I mean, even Scott Van Pelt said that was a wild time as far as when work was over, you guys worked hard and then you played harder. Pretty much, right?
The reason why Mike Whelan had nobody to talk about is because everybody was there. You're going to go to the HR people? Well, they were there. You're going to go to the top lead? They were there. Everybody was there. It starts off like everything does, a very innocent way to laugh and joke and wind down, and if you do it long enough, I always say nothing good ever happens if you're going to an ATM after midnight.
No joke.
Same thing. Nothing good comes when you go to a bar every single free time. But we knew nobody. We didn't have kids in Little League. We didn't have communities. We knew each other, and that was it. We worked hard together, we drank together, and lots of people developed relationships together. I mean, there was dating and there was marriages that came out of it. There was good things and there was not so good things. But the point about it is that it was what I always thought was an unspoken environment where we were a family, and I learned in time that that's not the way the real world is, and the protection that I had when I was working at HBO was not the same as the Golf Channel, and I was not the boss at HBO, and I was the boss at the Golf Channel, and there are always going to be people of the 100 that you hire that are after you. Now, part of that had to do is as weeks turned into months, we were going to have to make budget cuts. We didn't have the money to support everything that we launched with. And there was going to be people that unfortunately were going to lose their jobs. And some of those people, in their mind believed that if they got rid of Mike Whelan, that their jobs would be saved. So unfortunately, people went into my personal life, and I underscore personal life. It had nothing to do with the Golf Channel, and created a false narrative of who this guy Mike Whelan was, and it caused issues for me at the Golf Channel for a few weeks. But what it did to me, more importantly, was it took my severe depression and it amped it up to a number 12, as they would say in Spinal Tap, to where I had a very, very hard time functioning when I wasn't working. And, I was also battling suicidal thoughts at the time and had nobody to talk to.
So let's talk about that for a hot sec. Let's talk about that specific moment. And I want to clarify, you were not the only person that was named by these folks in this lawsuit where they were trying to take shots at the Golf Channel. It was you and plenty of other people at Golf Channel that these people were taking pretty wild shots at, and taking shots at your personal life and painting you and many others out to be unseemly or importune. So you are named in this suit. It obviously upsets you and exacerbates your mental issues that you were already struggling with. There's an investigation. They find that none of these claims have any merit as far as, your professional life. You're completely exonerated there. But you told me that was kind of a turning point for you where you felt like it was time to leave. You did not want to be there anymore.
It never made me mad. Mad is not the word that I would use. I was heartbroken by it. I was heartbroken because regardless of the mistakes I might have made, there was never any intention to hurt anybody, to disparage anybody, to do anything but to create a beautiful television network that I was able to do. And the Golf Channel mirrored society. You just don't get along with everybody. And there are people that are vicious and cruel and mean that will do whatever it takes to bring you down. I never thought it would happen, but it happened. And also back in the 80s and the 90s, it was a different time. I mean, that type of behavior would be unacceptable today in the new Me Too movement. But it was, it was everybody that was out there. But, they went after me as some evildoers, this malicious predator. And I was shocked by it. I never saw it coming. I didn't think it would be an issue. And the Golf Channel ran a thorough investigation where they interviewed lots of different people and came to the conclusion that, while Mike Whelan may have, after hours, not have been making the best decisions as an officer of the company, but that none of his actions, based upon the interviews that he did with said named people, wanted anything but this to go away. I mean, the complaints and the frivolous lawsuit was not named by women, or it was named by two disgruntled producers who wanted to save their jobs. And nobody wanted this to be any more than that. So the Golf Channel did a thorough, embarrassing investigation of my personal life and came to the conclusion that, we're not letting you go. They could have. It would have saved them a lot of money. It would have saved them a lot of embarrassment. It would have saved, but the facts are the facts. And, you follow the facts. At the end of the day, it was not a fireable offense. And in some cases, I was, apologized to by a lot of people for even becoming an issue. And again, they didn't go after Mike Whelan. They went after the Golf Channel. It was never Mike Whelan named in it. This was a Golf Channel lawsuit that happened to have my name and a bunch of other people for nefarious things that were never proven to be true. But at the point when this happened, it broke my spirit. I mean, the last place I wanted to be was a place where people had an impression of me that wasn't me. When this happened, I had probably 80 to 90% of the entire company come in and support me in the accusations and me as a human being. But having to confront hundreds of people and to share that I had depression and share that I had a substance abuse when the day was over was nobody's business, I ever believed. I needed to get some help, and forcing somebody to get help by exposing their deepest, darkest secrets, their worst days of their lives, is not the way that it should have played out. And in time, I think that the depression exacerbated. The the suicidal idolations became more frequent. And, in a year or two, I didn't want to be there. I didn't enjoy being there. The Golf Channel, Joe Gibbs knew that I didn't want to be there. It was no longer that the company was up and running. It was going to be sold. It was $1 billion business, and it was just time to move on with everybody. It was heartbreaking. It was crushing. It was the straw that broke the camel's back for an individual that suffers from the mental illness that I did. And I left the company with my head held high, but I quickly spiraled downhill and became a recluse. And, it led to an eventual poor decision where I attempted to take my life in December of 1999. Fortunately, it didn't happen, obviously.
Let's go there, though, Mike. I mean, that's pretty much part of what this piece hinges on, is that moment where it's Christmas Eve, you've left Golf Channel, it's pretty much gotten to the grimmest point. I don't even want to tell the story. You go ahead and tell it, but this is the moment where you attempted suicide and then kind of also found a reason to live. Tell us about that.
Well, I wasn't thinking clearly. One of the things that all people with severe, whether it's mania or whether it's depression or whether it's schizo, any type of mental illness, that if gone untreated, will exacerbate the mindset to where you just don't think clearly. And the shame that I had, the PTSD that I developed, it just took me to a very dark place where I just felt completely hopeless and sad and desperate and ashamed. And, all of those things that, when you read anything on mental illness are the words that people describe their malady with. But I don't know why I tried it. I didn't think that there was hope for me again. And on Christmas Eve of 1999, I went into my garage and, read up on it and decided that if I hooked a hose into my car, it would be a nice, peaceful way of saying goodbye, and I would never have to feel the way that I was feeling anymore. And, it was Christmas Eve, and that particular day, I used to get calls from hundreds of employees and cards and well wishes, and that particular year, I heard from nobody. All the thousands of people that I had helped in my life, the hundreds of people at the Golf Channel, it was out of sight, out of mind, and the loneliness took me into that garage, and I did something that, that could have been the end of the story, but what ended up happening was, as I was in my car, I heard my dogs, all three of them, barking. And it was a bark that almost a guttural sound that I had never heard before. And I suddenly kind of came to my senses and said, God, what if I ended up killing my dogs and nothing happens to me? That would be the worst story that I could possibly think of. And I aborted the mission. Ended up going and getting some help. And that was my road to recovery.
And I think it's interesting that you mention your dogs, because now, after you've gotten the help and you've found a reason to live and you're loving life and you're back on the path of living large, you have a very special thing that you do. You are someone that helps rescue animals, dogs, cats, and you do this in ways that I think are more grand than just about anybody I know. Tell us a little bit about how you got into the whole animal rescue department.
Well, I've always been an animal lover, and my wife Rebecca is an animal lover, and I just became more educated on the thousands of illegal puppy mills that are run around the country, and how animals are treated. And so we helped start a company that the sole mission is to break up these unseemly puppy mills and rescue these animals and take animals that are on the Humane Society on death watch that are going to be euthanized and rescue them and find foster homes and homes for thousands of dogs and cats that would otherwise live a horrible life and probably death. And we've been very, very blessed to get scores of veterinarians and people to participate in the foster system and in the adoption system. And we've also been able to have more than a dozen local ranches and farms who are willing to take the dogs and cats that we can't find homes and give them a place to live so that their final days or long days are that of joy and kindness and peace and serenity, the way that animals are supposed to live. Not in cages and not on death row and not collared up in a puppy mill. And it's been something that's been near and dear to our heart. We've saved over 2,500 animals and very, very blessed that we have people who share our same mission with us. And it's one of the many things that I do in my life. I also do a lot with men's health issues, having been a prostate cancer survivor. I try to get the message out there on a daily basis about men's health, making sure that people don't have to go through what I did from a physical standpoint with my cancer and subsequent other maladies that were caused because of my cancer and chemotherapy treatments. So, look, it wasn't like on Christmas of 1999, I all of a sudden changed my whole life around and everything has been rosy. I have had my serious ups and downs since. I have, fallen many times, but I've got the tools today to learn how to get up. And, and today it's a good life. It's not what I would have expected 30 years ago. It's different. You never know when good things are going to turn bad or bad things are going to turn good. That's why I try not to label anything and just go with the flow of how life takes me to the next step. But 25 years later, I'm still around. I'm talking to you about, the Golf Channel. Many people probably who knew me back in '99 wouldn't probably have guessed that I wouldn't have been around 19 years later to even talk about it. And today I am. I harbor very little ill will towards anybody, even the Peter Kesslers. For many years, I didn't even think about the Golf Channel, to be honest, until probably maybe 2 or 3 months ago, when Peter started to act out, and everybody wanted my response to it. And Alan Shipnutt's article got me back into the Golf Channel arena. And then I found out about you, and you found out about Peter. And then all of a sudden it's turned into rehashing a lot of old things from yesteryear. Many are good, many are still painful, but I've learned how to manage the pain and enjoy the good days that I have for the most time.
Well, and you definitely led me to Peter Kessler, because I was definitely going to ask you about him before we got done with all of this. You, like I said at the beginning, you helped with the piece that I wrote for FromTheBackTees.com about Peter Kessler.
Well, I helped in the sense that I gave you an interview. That's all I did.
Well, but I guess, you filled in some gaps for me.
Yeah.
You helped because I was misinformed. I was operating under a lot of misinformation that was coming directly from former Golf Channel icon Peter Kessler. I had done an interview with him where he had spoke for 90 straight minutes, making all sorts of grandiose claims about what he had done at the Golf Channel, taking way too much credit for things that he had done, basically saying he was you, that he had written, produced, directed, created. He was the Leonardo da Vinci of Golf Channel. He was you, Mike. And that everything that had been done there was because of him. He put Golf Channel on the map. He was the greatest announcer and greatest television personality in sports ever, of any, no, not just sports, of any medium He was the greatest broadcaster ever. He was better than Edward R. Murrow and all these people. And then I went on and was talking about it, and you heard me talking about what he had said and passing it on as secondhand information. And you called and corrected me on quite a bit of it and put me in touch with people that were able to corroborate the truth. So I guess that's what I meant by help, but we'll go a little deeper. This Breaking Bad with Peter Kessler article, and I definitely encourage everybody listening to go read it if you haven't already. It's done very well. Gotten a lot of great feedback from the people involved about it. Like last week, I was talking to Scott Van Pelt. And by the way, I'm going to play that after we get done talking, Mike. I'm going to play the interview I did with Scott Van Pelt from ESPN. He was saying this piece was entirely accurate and really well done with the research. And I got to give you credit, because if you hadn't lit a fire under my ass to get going on digging deeper, I probably would have run a puff piece that pretty much just echoed most of Peter's sentiments. So without it probably wouldn't happen.
Back in the 90s, I remember meeting with Oprah Winfrey. And one of the things that fascinated me about Oprah Winfrey was talking to her about her multi-billion-dollar production company and brand that she developed, which probably will never be surpassed by anybody. But the wonderful thing that I remembered about talking to Oprah was that how much she talked about those around her, the people that supported her, that believed in her, that helped her, the producers, the directors, the writers, the people that got the coffee, the people that got her makeup, the people that dressed her. And she was just a very, very gracious person. And more than anything that Oprah has ever created, and she is one of a kind, her kindness about what it takes to do anything in life just always stuck with me very, very deeply. And look, all brilliant announcers, all brilliant television people, and I don't care if you're doing the local news in Iowa or you're the host of the biggest show for ESPN, Fox, or the Golf Channel, all people are brilliant because they have a sense of ego, they have a sense of narcissism. I mean, that's part of their genius. But every now and then it just gets a little bit distorted. And that's what I felt that your presentation of not only Peter Kessler, but the Golf Channel in whole. So I just felt that it was necessary to maybe clear up my experience, since I was there at the very beginning and involved in more than one show, and let you know that, yes, Peter Kessler was a brilliant host. That will never be denied. I will never say anything but. However, Peter did not do anything more than what he was paid to do brilliantly. His job was to be the host of Golf Talk Live, Academy Alive, Viewers Forum, and he did it brilliantly. But he didn't pop out of the sky, and he didn't do it without help, and there was hundreds of men and women behind the scenes long before the Golf Channel's Golf Talk Live ever went on live that night in January, that were responsible into the success of all of those shows. And when I hear one person wanting to claim that he, put the Golf Channel on the map, it was a conglomeration of many people that did that. Was Peter the most notable because he had the highest profile franchise shows? Yes. But without the producer and the director and Mike Whelan and Joe Gibbs and Bob Greenway and the people who did the live tournament behind Keith and Jeff Himes and Paul Farnsworth, and the list goes on and on and on, the Golf Channel would have folded like a cheap chair. So, yes, Peter played an important role, I think Peter elevated the Golf Channel to a level by which I don't know if anybody else would have done it as brilliantly. But, it was a team effort, and I hate the idea, as being a part of a team, to hear anybody say that the game was won 100% because of them. And I just needed to make it clear to you that there's a bigger story and creation behind the 24-hour network than just Peter Kessler arriving on set and having the director say 3, 2, 1, go Peter, and he was a star.
Well, I was talking to the guys on the radio show I just did on the Bernie and Dalby Talking Golf show out of Phoenix, and I was comparing it to a Fowler, say. Ricky Fowler, obviously very, very visible golfer on the tour now, one of the most popular golfers, and he has been for about 8 years or so. Peter was super popular on Golf Channel for about 8 years. And then, due to what I've been told by many people now, including yourself, was a very poor attitude and snipiness with others, he was let go and never really got an opportunity again. So it would be like if Fowler had this great run of popularity and then suddenly turned very sour on everyone and basically drummed himself off the tour, but then pops back up 10 years later going, I am the greatest golfer who ever lived, and I put the PGA on the map, and they owe everything to me, and it's all about my legacy. And he's going around saying that to everyone that's still out there making the PGA great. And I use Fowler as the example because, one, he's very popular, but two, he hasn't won any majors. And as far as broadcasters go, majors are Emmys and Ace Awards, right? So it'd be like that.
The only difference of Ricky Fowler is, from what I understand, he's a very beloved individual on the tour and around that. There is no animus about Ricky Fowler as being a disliked performer on tour. It is surprising. Look, if you would have told me that Peter Kessler's career would have only have lasted significantly for 8 years. I mean, I know he did a Sirius XM podcast, a show. I know he's done a couple of things, but, I am absolutely, and I said this in your piece, I think, I am absolutely shocked. And I don't know if that's even the right word. I am absolutely shocked how this particular individual, with his knowledge, did not land another Golf Channel-like gig with a CBS, an NBC, a Fox, an ESPN. The problem is this. It's a very small community, broadcast television, the sports world. Word about you spreads very, very quickly. And executives like I was at the time, or ESPN, they have to weigh the balance of, is the drama and tumultuous relationships within the body of their building worth the effort of hiring an individual? And because the bottom line is the bottom line. The bottom line is, can a Peter Kessler, or can a Joe Buck, or can Brandel Chambly, or can a Chris Berman or a Scott Van Pelt generate dollars on your bottom line? If the answer is yes, they want you. If the answer is no, then they don't want you. But Peter kind of falls in this very weird Twilight Zone space where there's no doubt that to the viewer, Peter is a very beloved, and still is to a small niche of people that love his 8-year body of work. Unfortunately, those aren't the individuals that hire and fire and pay people. So unfortunately, I mean, I always thought that Peter Kessler years ago should have done a mea culpa. He should have gone to whomever he needed to with his tail between his leg and said, look, I blew a couple of opportunities. I got too big for my britches. I understand that. I realize it. I really think I have a contribution to be made, and I would really like a final act to my career. And I think he probably would have got, but instead of that, he's gone into this Twitter sphere of absolutely viciously attacking all of those who are responsible for giving him his next break. And, I don't think Peter's final act is going to be a television act. It might be a promotional self-created. It might be, giving dinner talks to a few people that want to hear about the nostalgic old days. But I think, Peter has pretty much shot the sheriff.
Yeah, no kidding. And you said you listen to that every day driving the Golf Channel, so I think if anybody knows about it, it's you. All right, so before we get done here, I got to take one last run at Pete here, because those that read the piece will know that Kessler started out calling me his good friend who he'd do anything for. And by the time I started asking him tougher questions, when I started figuring out that not everything he said was 100% accurate, he called me a scum-sucking worm. He said that he was going to send me to jail, he was going to ruin me financially, and he was going to break my neck and crack my editor's skull open. Mike, might it be that he's struggling with some sociopathy here? Because, like you said, he could have been contrite at any point along the way, and people probably would have given him another chance. Yet he seems so utterly remorseless, not just with me, but with anyone. It seems like there's no apologizing in this guy. Could this possibly be some of that, or do you not even want to put those words in your mouth?
I am not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but I will say that personality disorders manifest themselves in very, very strange, antisocial ways. And as brilliant as Peter is and continues to be, I mean, he's witty, he's smart. When you first meet him, he's charming. He's all of those things, which makes him so dangerous for those that try to play with him in the play box. Look, I hired the guy. Without Mike Whelan, there would never be a Peter Kessler. Peter Kessler would have lived his life in upstate New York somewhere. Lord knows what he would have done. But look, if the person who gave somebody the greatest opportunity that they've ever had in their life, where he not only found his niche in life, but he was able to recreate his family environment, all the things that we want in life, to be a part of, to be loved, to have. If Peter feels that way about me, I can only imagine the way he attacks other people. I just don't think there's room in Peter's life for more than one person to shine on center stage on Broadway. I think it's no more difficult than that. And I think that the short time that I was at the Golf Channel, I was the guy. Peter was the star, but Mike Whelan was the guy, and I think it probably drove him absolutely batshit to have to deal with that every single day when he wanted nothing more than for me to be gone so that there would not be another person who could take the glory of center stage. And Peter, certainly wasn't one of my biggest supporters at the very end. It ended very acrimoniously, sadly, but I'm a very observant individual. It's probably why I love animals so much. A dog, when you come over, knows right away whether he's or she's somebody who wants to sit on your lap or somebody who wants to snip at your heel. And I'm kind of like that little mutt that, when I meet somebody, I know right away whether or not your heart is in a good place, or whether it's something I need to watch out for. And I certainly always had to watch out for Peter. He had moments of kindness and appreciation, but they were very, very fleeting. After all of this, I still wish that, that he would find some serenity in his life, some calmness, some empathy. But I think he believes that in this new world of social media, and it's not Peter Kessler. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's Rush Limbaugh, it's Mike and the Mad Dog, it's Alex Jones, it's our own 45th president. The way to create a base is to attack others vehemently. And I think Peter believes that, by doing that is his way back to relevance. And as I said in your piece, I find that beneath him. I wouldn't agree if I was his agent or if I was consulting him. But I don't know if it's a mental illness or a social media malady that we're starting to see amongst many men and women in today's marketplace of just trying to be relevant.
Yeah, I almost think that sociopathy has become kind of status quo. And you're right. I think it starts with all of the various people that kind of act that way so unapologetically. And we're seeing it now seep in ways that I don't even know if you could call it clinical. It just seems like it's kind of vicarious sociopathy, where people just stop caring about others' feelings and start feeling like if you have any feelings at all, well, you're a puss, and that's just that, and get over it. And
I think it goes back to the 90s when these reality TV started to pop up, where the ratings were driven by people screaming at one another and fighting one another and mistreating one another, and it evolved to the talk radio circuit. It talked to sport. It entered sports radio. It entered journalism. I think that there are a certain demographic of people that love this ranting and raving with a bully pulpit, and they find it truthful. Peter Kessler speaks the truth. We need more of that, not the boring Golf Channel format that they have today. Well, unfortunately, executives aren't as convinced that they want that type of drama on their airwaves, and that's why you don't see that anywhere in mainstream media, sports television. The guy's the greatest in his mind. I don't know much about Twitter. You do. I don't know if you're the greatest of all time. Having 9,000 followers is a little bit underachieving. I think the kid who has the tutorial of Play-Doh Funhouses has about 13,000 followers. So I don't really know where 9,000 falls in the scheme of importance and relevance in today's social media world.
Hey, bud, the Great Pumpkin, our 45th president's got about 60 million.
Well, there you go. And I think he's probably set the foundation to where there are a lot of people realizing that a couple of pages from his playbook, gosh, why couldn't that be me? Why can't I go after people and come up with names for those I don't like and attack? I mean, the way that Peter's gotten his most publicity, and please correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not a Peter Kessler, has been to attack those who have prominence. Brandel Chambly, Tommy Roy, a great producer for NBC, Jack Graham, Mark Loomis. It's attacking everybody, thinking that it's going to elevate your standing, when in fact it's just putting the nails on your professional coffin ever to have another opportunity to do that. Peter, when I knew him, I saw that side of him. There's no doubt about it. Peter is a very passive, aggressive attacker. He's brilliant. He's smart. He can get under your skin cerebrally. Smart. He's very good at that, and he can drive you crazy. But, is that the person that you want and you can deal with day after day after day? And I think the problem at the Golf Channel was those shows were shot in the Golf Channel studios. Peter had to be there multiple times a week. It wasn't like it was a produced outside distributor who happened to package the Peter Kessler shows and then overnight them to the Golf Channel and we aired them. These were produced by the Golf Channel, owned by the Golf Channel, and will forever be owned by the Golf Channel. And I think Peter has mixed the idea of being a movie television producer who owns their own product, Chuck Lorre on The Big Bang Theory, Young Sheldon, those types of shows where they own the show in perpetuity and they deserve to be paid and made money, and other shows that are owned by the network. ESPN, Brian Gumbel does not own Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. HBO does.
Yeah.
Same thing with Golf Talk Live. Peter Kessler's production company, of which there was none, did not own that show. He has no rights. He has no ability to resell or package. And I think there might be a confusion or an unwillingness to admit that it's not his.
Well, I just Googled him, Mike.
Of course, like you said.
I just Googled him because you were talking about
the body of work that Peter did was amongst the best I've ever seen by anyone in our industry. I'm telling you, he learned quickly. He was great at what he did. Most people loved him, who he was interviewed by. It was just the people that he worked with wanted to jump off a building when they were assigned to one of his shows.
Well, I just Googled him, Mike. I wanted to actually prove your point about what he's known for now. I just typed Peter Kessler into Google. That's it. No other words. The number one piece that comes up is former Golf Channel host Peter Kessler is a huge fan of Peter Kessler. That's the Shipnuck piece. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two is his website and his Twitter. Then we've got Peter Kessler, former Golf Channel star, is not going away quietly. Yet another not so great piece about him. Then we've got Peter Kessler calls Brandel Chambly destructive bad influence. Peter Kessler lashed out at anyone and everyone on Twitter. What the fuck is wrong with Peter Kessler? This is the order of links that comes up at the top of Google.
I think that that it would behoove Peter the same way it behooved me to get help that was far beyond my ability to have the answers to. My best thinking always got me in trouble, and I had to surrender my heart and soul and my feelings to those who knew better. But it saddens me. It saddens me that, and I said it in your piece, I should be getting phone calls today on the 25th anniversary of me being at the Golf Channel that there's an induction going on in St. Augustine, Florida, of Peter Kessler into the Broadcast Hall of Fame. And that's what I would have bet the ranch on back in 1995. And it couldn't be more of the antithesis of what's happening today. Peter's not reached out to me. I don't think he has any plans to reach out to me. I don't think he cares what I think about the situation. He's never reached out to me with production ideas, knowing that I was available out there. So I think Peter Kessler, when I walked out of the doors in 1999, pretty much, put a proverbial shotgun to my existence and blew me into smithereens, to where he would never have to deal or work or share anything with Michael Whelan again. I wish that, he would have listened more. I think that he would have had better advice, and I think that Peter would be on the tube somewhere today. Your piece had some very disturbing, Keith, who, Peter believes that he lived in a vacuum in the Golf Channel, in which part he did, but he also had a huge presence when he was there, and it wasn't a good presence, as your piece showed. And I was absolutely, I wasn't surprised, but I was kind of amazed that not one person you spoke with had anything positive to say besides he was a brilliant broadcaster. It didn't talk about him as a person, didn't talk about him as somebody who made a contribution to the company. I mean, there's a lot of people that could have benefited from his knowledge, but that's not Peter. And I think if you trace it back as far as you do little Mike Whelan at 8 years old, seeing the divorce of my mother and father, which led to decades of emotional problems, there are probably stories in Peter's life that he may or may not have shared that are responsible for the way he is today, sadly. I hope that his final act isn't this. I hope that, we love redemption stories on this planet. Everybody deserves a break. I mean, look, I got a break. I think I didn't get treated badly because I was a kind person. And I think when you fall, you meet the same people on your way up as you do on your way down. And, what I hear time after time after time after time from most people who are important in my life is they heartfully appreciate what I did for them. They heartfully appreciate the kindness I showed to them. They kindly appreciate the generosity I gave to them. There aren't many bad stories about Michael Whelan except for a frivolous piece of slander that exists in the webosphere because things just don't go away once you accuse somebody. It's like me trying to prove that I don't see a unicorn in my backyard. I can't do that. Once people accuse you of something, you can't disprove a negative thing. And so what I try to do every day is be kind, be gentle, be considerate, learn from my mistakes, share my experience, my strength, my hope with other people who have fallen on hard times. Do I miss what I used to do? Absolutely. When you're a creative soul by nature, you miss the creativity. But I'm kind of happy where I am right now. I'm a little bit calmer than I was many years ago. I have a wonderful person in my life that I love dearly. I've got my animals. And so, I don't look at my life as a very sad journey. I look at it as a journey that most of us go through in our lives. Just some are kept in secret and some are brought to public, and it's how we deal with them that defines us at the end of the day. I want to be remembered as somebody who was a kind person who fell and got up than a person who was a prick that lived their life alone.
Well, Mike, I can verify from our friendship, which has surely popped off as a result of our time interviewing and getting to know each other. You're a very good dude. Everybody, like you say, and like I'm about to play when we get done here in a sec with Scott Van Pelt and everybody else involved with Golf Channel, has gone on and on about not only the great opportunities that you gave to them, but how kind and sweet you are. I definitely appreciate you taking all this time to come on and talk with us today. Definitely go check out the piece Breaking Bad with Peter Kessler at FromTheBackTees.com, listeners. Mike is in there. And then also coming soon, we're going to take our time with it, but coming soon, the Michael Whelan story. I built a masterpiece and then fell apart with help from yours truly, Tucker Booth. Be looking for that at FromTheBackTees.com. If you're on social media, it's hashtag Rappers Don't Golf. That's my blog, Rappers Don't Golf. And you can find Mike. It's Mike J. Whelan, and that's Whelan. Mike J. Whelan on Twitter. Give him a follow. Hit him up. He will talk to you. He's not one of these guys that's stuck up. He will absolutely talk to you. Really appreciate you coming on, brother, man. Definitely enjoyed it.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I love up and coming journalists and creative people. And, like I said, I think you've learned a lot in the past couple of months, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think your future is bright. I always enjoy it. I never thought that I would be following Jack White on the 4th of July. The last radio show I did was 89 with Howard Stern, and what a way to bookend it with you.
Me and Howard together at last,
you and Howard, baby.
Well, Mike, thanks so much. Stick around, listeners. I'm going to play the Scott Van Pelt interview, ESPN's A-lister Scott Van Pelt talking about Mike Whelan in a couple of seconds. So stick around. I'm going to lead you off with this one. We led you in with I Shot the Sheriff, Mike. We're going to lead you out with John Daly, everybody's favorite PGA player, playing Knocking on Heaven's Door as only John can. Mike Whelan, everybody. Killradio.org. Church.
How'd that go? Good?
Really good. Mama, check this bag. Jumping me.